Hi, friend. Welcome to the Bring to Light podcast. I'm your host, Camilla, and I'm so thankful that you're here. Join me and special guests every Tuesday to shed light on what God is doing. Our hope is to share the happiest news that we've ever heard in hopes of helping you discover your true source of joy and wellness. Thank you so much for being here and for listening. Enjoy. Okay. Hi everyone. It's been a week-ish since the last episode, but it feels like it's been a long time since the last recording. Today I have Cameron on the podcast, and I'm so excited for her to share what she's been learning as she's been reading a book. Oh my gosh, she's gonna do this. Record.
Okay.
Ignore her. She's been reading The Meaning of Marriage by Tim Keller, which is a really popular, beautiful book about the meaning of marriage. And I haven't read the whole thing, but Cameron is in the middle of reading it. And as you guys know, I am married. Cameron is not married, but she is a young Christian that's dating. And so, yeah, we're just going to talk about what that looks like. And Cameron's going to share what she's been learning. And I'm really excited for the conversation. And
Yeah, for sure. I'm really excited for this conversation too. My name's Cameron. I've been here in Austin for about a year. I'm 25 and I moved to Austin to work for a nonprofit called TruCare in South Austin. And what TruCare is a nonprofit faith-based ministry where we give free pregnancy tests and ultrasounds to women and who are experiencing unplanned pregnancies for the most part, and we offer them education about their options. We offer them support through the parenting journey and also just spiritual encouragement, really emotional and spiritual encouragement if they're open to it, because sometimes this is the darkest part of a woman's life, and so we want to be able to offer her the love of Jesus through that. And so just with all of that, this topic is very near and dear to my heart because a lot of what I see happens because of the brokenness of relationships in this world, and especially romantic relationships.
Yeah.
And so, it's been really fun to be reading The Meaning of Marriage. This book has been on my list for a long time, but I just recently ordered it, finally picked it up. And it's just been already so insightful. I'm only not even to chapter 3, but I've already learned so much, or I'm not done with chapter 3.
Yeah.
But I've just been learning. I've always known, marriage is a bigger purpose, especially biblically, than just to people who want to be together for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
I've known that it's had a much bigger purpose than that, but I haven't really been able, being single and not being in marriage and not really thinking about this all that much. I haven't known, okay, what is God's specific intended purpose? I've had ideas about it, but reading even these few chapters of this book has really helped to clarify a lot of just those questions I've had.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd said this on the podcast before, but Nathan and I don't know if you know, but Nathan and I have been together for almost 8 years, and we got married in 2022. So we got married like 6 years in. And I think we both postponed marriage for so long because we both come from divorced families. One of our parents, my mom and his dad, have been remarried 3 times. So we didn't grow up seeing an example of marriage. And so we were always kind of afraid to go into it, or we had a lot of negative beliefs, lies around marriage and what it was for and what it meant. And we really had no clue what it was for. And I remember before we had a home church and before we became Christians, I would just tell people, like, what's the point? Like, we love each other. We're together already. Like, why sign a paper? What is that going to change, right? Like, we love each other. We're not going anywhere. We're committed to each other. So I clearly had no clue that marriage, what it was designed for and what God made it for. So I didn't know any of that until we started going to the Stone regularly. And at one of the sermons, they were talking about a marriage class that was upcoming. They do it every, like, I think twice a year, every semester. And the purpose of the class is for couples that are newly married or are engaged. And the whole course is about what is marriage, how to like resolve conflict in marriage, like the meaning of sex, finances, like all of the things that are under the large umbrella of marriage. And my mind was just blown. Like I had I had no clue how important and how sacred and how beautiful and much of a like marriage is a gift, and it's special. And I just didn't understand anything. I didn't understand the meaning of purity, or waiting until marriage and the importance of that, and the role that the gospel plays in the meaning of marriage, which is our marriage with our spouses is supposed to mirror our marriage with Christ and his marriage to the body, his church bride. And there was just so much there that I did not know because I hadn't read the Bible yet. And I was still a young Christian. I still am. So I'm excited to talk about this because I'm sure it'll be a big refresher for me. And sadly, Nathan and I didn't get married with all of that information in mind, but now we have it. And so that that class that we took at our church was pivotal. Our marriage changed completely, like 360, after we learned what it was intended for and what our roles were as husband and wife, and we were called to as a married couple. So
It's
yeah,
awesome.
I didn't know. And I think I said I believed before of like, oh, it's just a paper that you sign. It's like a legal document. I think that is what our culture, that's how we see marriage. Maybe if you're not in a church, or if you're in a family of believers, maybe it's different. But
Mhm.
I think even then, your perspective of marriage isn't like crystal clear unless um, you're reading those specific chapters of the Bible that are around it, or maybe you're studying it by reading a book like this. So
Yeah.
I just thought of something. I'm curious if your perspective of marriage has ever like wavered. Was it always what you hear in like the media or in our culture, what the world says about marriage, or were you always pretty did you always see clearly what marriage was intended for because you grew up in a Christian home?
I do think, um, my view of marriage was a lot different than what you're saying.
Mhm.
I never thought that marriage was just a piece of paper. I've always wanted to be married.
Mm.
My parents, although of course nobody's marriage is perfect,
Yeah.
I grew up seeing a really great example of two people who divorce wasn't an option,
Yeah.
wasn't a word just in our house. They have been together since my mom was 22 and my dad was 24.
Oh my
And
gosh.
um,
That makes me so happy.
yeah, yeah, I feel really blessed to have grown up in that space. And also, I was in a Christian homeschooled family, and so truly, most of the families around me also came from homes with marriages like that as well. I
Yeah.
really don't know a lot of divorce. I still haven't even seen a lot of divorce close up,
Wow.
which is a blessing.
It really
I do
is.
recognize though that that's not the norm at all,
Yeah.
and I feel really blessed to be in that sphere. But at the same time, I also think I grew up in that Christian environment in a place where marriage was kind of idolized.
Mm.
In our culture, sometimes marriage is, like you were saying, it's just a piece of paper, or what's the point? Or I need to be 100% sure and have dated this person for 10 years before I commit my life to them.
Yeah.
Um, and, on the opposite end of things, I saw a lot of people that I grew up and went to school with who dated in high school and got married like immediately out of high school. And, even though that's beautiful for them, and I do think that they're all still together and, the Lord had purpose in that and that was his plan for their lives,
Mhm.
I was seeing it more as, okay, this is just what you do.
Mm.
You grow up, you get married, and that's when you become complete. Um, and I definitely grew up with some different views about, again, yeah, this person will complete you. It doesn't matter who they are as long as they love God and you really, really love them. You get married and you'll live happily ever after. And I've had to work through a lot of those beliefs. And even this book is clarifying for me that marriage isn't about your self fulfillment. And I think that's what I have thought growing up that it was, and still struggle to believe sometimes.
Yeah.
Marriage is about, okay, when I get married, I'm going to be with this perfect person. I'm going to be happy all the time. It's going to be blissful. Like, yeah, we'll have fights but we'll get over them and my life will be 20 times better and
Yeah.
I'll finally be complete as a Christian and as a person. And reading this book has honestly been such a grace because it's showing that the point of marriage is the complete opposite. The point, like you said, is to picture the gospel, picture our marriage with Jesus and how Jesus laid his life down for us. That's the point of marriage, is that you reach mutual self-fulfillment through individual self-denial.
Um,
And I'm like, oh,
that is so opposite
it's so opposite.
to what our culture tells us, right? Like,
Mhm,
I'm just gonna reiterate it from my own brain, but yeah, people think get married, that'll fix my relationship, or they'll make me happy, or it's all from the perspective, a very selfish perspective of like,
mhm,
they will fulfill me. I will have someone that can fill me sexually, that can
mhm,
fill me physically, intimately, emotionally. I'll have a roommate forever, right? Like, it's very like, how can they fit perfectly into my life, like you were saying? If you go into a relationship with that perspective of this person's going to fix me or make me happy, I think it will do the opposite because you're fully, that's a heavy burden to put on someone, and no person can do that for us. Only God can. And I think a marriage only works if we are laying our lives down for the other person,
mhm,
right? Like, as I feel like this might be a good segue into like the role of a wife and a husband, and husbands are called to lay down their life for their wives and to love their wives as God loved his church, which is a huge calling for husbands. That blew my mind when I learned that. I was like, whoa, Nathan's got a really big responsibility as my husband. And we didn't know that before reading this. It's in Ephesians 5:25 through 33. It says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water by the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. And I'll just stop there really quick. That is a huge responsibility again, like to love your wife as Christ loved his church, gave himself up for her. That's like full laying your life down for your wife, putting her above your life, above your needs, your desires, above your family, your friends, your kids, everything. That's huge. And then the husband's also called to sanctify her, that he might present her as holy and without blemish. Like, a husband is supposed to care for his wife in every way, nourish her spiritually, physically. Like, it is a huge role. And then verse 28 says, in the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves Christ, he who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Father, I keep skipping, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. Ephesians 5:25 through 33.
I I really love that passage, and I also think it's one of the most misunderstood in the Bible. Because right before the passage where it's calling husbands to lay down their lives for their wife, it says, "Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord." This is in verses 22 through 24. "For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands." Something really funny happened the other day where my boyfriend and I are reading this book together, and we went to Mozart's to talk about it. We got a lot of people who were like, "Oh, congrats, y'all are engaged," reading this book, which was really funny because we're not engaged. I mean, we're obviously talking about marriage, so that's why we're reading this book. But anyway, we had a lot of strangers coming up to us and commenting just by seeing the book, which was very interesting. We had a couple come up, and they were older, and the husband was like, "Wow, what a great book. I love Timothy Keller. Props to you for reading this." And the wife said, "Yeah, it's a good book, but don't listen to all that submit stuff. That's so outdated." Addressing specifically to me. When you get to that part, just disregard it. That's ridiculous. Basically, just very much how the culture responds to this verse is what I was seeing from her. And me and my boyfriend were like, "Oh, okay, thank you, random woman, for commenting on this." But I think it's so interesting how it is scary. It makes sense how this verse has been used and abused
Mhm.
in the past, with husbands or the church demanding that wives be completely obedient to their husband in every single thing, even to the point of him being abusive toward her. And
No.
that's just not the context of this verse. Again, I'm not married, so the way that I can relate to this verse is more in the context of my relationship with Christ. And if the husband is supposed to be laying his life down for us like Christ did for us, it pictures how I'm supposed to submit not only to my husband one day, but also to Christ.
Yeah.
And the power and the motivation for why I obey Christ is because he's laid himself down for me. Like, he's given me everything.
Yeah.
And so I can trust him fully.
Yeah.
And he wants and I'm not saying that, the husband always completely knows best or anything, but in
Yeah.
my relationship with Christ,
Mhm.
he always knows what's best for me. And
Yeah.
so in that trust, I'm so happy and willing to submit to him.
Yeah.
Not all the time, I struggle,
Yeah.
but at the end of the
It's
day,
not easy. Yeah.
I'm submitting to him because I know how much he loves me.
Mhm.
And I think that's just an important point that we miss in
Yeah.
our culture. You're not talking about how, well, you're going to want to respect and submit to a man who's loving you out of his love for Christ and
Yeah.
like being led by the Lord and having intimacy with him that turns into unconditional love for you. Like, it's not going to be hard to
Yeah.
submit to a man like that.
No. I think when people say something like, "Oh, ignore the submit part," the first thing that came to me that like hurt my soul is you can't just like pick and choose pieces of the Bible that you believe in or that you follow. It's all God's word and it's all in there for good reason, and his design is perfect, and there is a lot of context that I think is missing, and you have to read it in its entirety. Or have conversations with other people that have that context to understand it. But yeah, I'm sure before I was a believer and before I was going to church and reading God's word, would have also I would have probably also been offended by that. Like, why would I'm not a slave, or why would I fully submit to my husband? But you're right. If your husband is if he loves you enough to propose to you, to marry you, um, if he loves you the way that Christ loves us, and lays down his life for you, then yeah, I mean, you want to submit, you want to let him lead your life because he knows best. He's not God, right? And so there is a distinction between a godly man and our relationship with Christ. But he is being led by the Holy Spirit. And so then we are as well by submitting to our husbands. But yes, I think when people look at that verse and are offended by the word submit and are offended by what a wife is called to, they're not picturing a godly man, a person that isn't following Jesus. And um, I don't know why my mind doesn't immediately go to like abuse. Maybe it's just the word submit that has negative connotation. I don't
Mhm.
know what it is, but I wouldn't think that a husband would ever abuse his wife. Does it happen? Yes, unfortunately, and it's awful, but and it even happens in Christian marriages,
Mhm.
unfortunately. And so I think that's why people might be like, "Well, what's the point?" And again, I think it goes back to that perspective of selfishness. Like, why should I do anything for him? Or, but I mean, it's a marriage. It's it's
Right.
a two-way street. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm trying to think of the reasons why that might be offensive, but
Well, it is going back, like you mentioned, to the difference between the cultural view of marriage and the biblical view of marriage. And in chapter 1, Timothy Keller talks so much about the difference between those two things. And yeah, where he labels the culture as like having a view of a me marriage,
mm,
where let me find a quote. He says people either want too much out of marriage or are deeply afraid of it, and the pessimism about marriage comes from a new unrealistic idealism about marriage, born of a significant shift in our culture's understanding of the purpose of marriage,
mm,
where they're thinking, to marry this person, can the other person really keep my interest? Is the chemistry strong enough? Those are all me centered questions. Like,
yeah,
can this person fulfill me? Are they going to help me get to my desires and goals? Um, and of course, some of those things are important. You don't want
yeah,
to marry someone that's going to inhibit fully your God given purpose. You
yeah,
want to partner with someone for the gospel and for the purpose that the Lord has given each of you.
yeah,
So don't just completely deny everything that and who you are just
yeah,
to marry someone that might not be right for you. But everyone is out here, like it said, they either want too much out of a marriage, so they're looking for someone who perfectly complements them and perfectly fits into their life,
mm,
or they're deeply afraid of marriage for reasons like you said. Maybe they've seen a lot of divorce in their family or marriage not really working out. But it's this big cycle. People are divorcing because they realize that this person can't possibly meet all of their needs. And so they're going to look for the next thing. And that's just such a huge contrast to what the Bible calls us to in marriage. Again, laying down our own lives for the other person. So we're getting married so that we can learn to be less self centered and therefore look more like Christ.
mm,
And again, I don't know because I haven't been in marriage, but I can imagine
mhm,
that relationship is far more intimate and sanctifying than any other.
yeah,
Um, I'm single right now, and yeah, I have a boyfriend, and yeah, I have roommates, but I can kind of do what I want right now.
mhm,
I go to bed when I want. I keep my house to the cleanliness degree that I want to keep it to.
mhm,
My schedule's my own, and those are just on the surface things.
yeah,
Also, if I'm having a bad day, if I really want to, I can kind of hide that,
yeah,
and it's not really affecting a whole lot of other people. But in marriage, you're constantly having to work to do the hard things for the betterment of the other person.
yeah,
But the what's cool about that is that that's how you actually reach true joy and fulfillment, is
mhm,
by serving.
yeah,
And that just only makes sense when you understand the gospel,
mhm,
you know, because we're so wired to try and fulfill our own desires and our own needs. That's the
mhm,
first thing we wake up wanting to do every single day.
yeah,
But I don't know about, how you feel or other people listening to this podcast, but when I do that, that's what leads to death the most. That feeling of
mm,
depression, of being lost, of that takes away my joy, it takes away my peace.
yeah,
And only when I'm surrendering my desires at the foot of the cross and saying, okay, God, I want to do what you're calling me to more than what I think is good for myself, that I'm actually finding true rest and true joy.
Mm.
And I would imagine that that's what it would be like in marriage too.
Does the book talk about where marriage originated? Because I wonder if people would argue that God didn't create marriage.
Yeah, I
So,
think people do. The argument, the whole argument is covered in chapter 1 of the book, all of those things.
mhm,
It talks about how people say, marriage is just a function of society. It's just an ancient practice that was used to secure property
mm,
or to make agreements between countries or people groups. We need an alliance, so I'll give you my daughter in marriage. Um, Completely devoid of love, really political.
mm,
And I think that that's the argument people use to say we have evolved past the need for marriage in our society today.
mm,
But they're not recognizing that marriage was instituted from the very first people that God made,
mm,
Adam and Eve. He created them to cleave together and become one flesh. And all of our society is based off of the foundation of marriage. Without marriage, we really don't have a society. And, if you're really interested in that argument, go read the book because I don't have all the stats off the top of my head. But it's so much more than just a piece of paper or a political agreement. There's so many studies and proof that being married actually enhances your sense of well-being. Married people live longer.
mhm,
Kids who are born in two-parent married households are more likely to be successful and less likely to get into drugs, alcohol, crime.
mhm.
Um, it's just a point of security in our culture. And it's hard to explain that without the understanding of
Yeah.
marriage that's given in the Bible.
Mhm.
So, two people that are trying to sustain a healthy marriage that don't know the Lord, that's really hard,
Yeah.
because again, not knowing the ups and downs from personal experience, but just seeing it in the lives of my friends and family, you have to have something that you're clinging on to outside of yourself, outside of your faulty feelings, in order to have a successful marriage. And maybe some people who don't believe in the Lord have something like that. Maybe
Yeah.
they are practicing self-denial in a
Mhm.
way that makes their marriage work
Mhm.
without even realizing that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
But if you're looking for something to fulfill you and that's your basis of staying in a marriage, then it's not going to last.
Yeah. And nothing ever will. Like, Zoe told me about a book called Captivating, and the author's name is Stacy
Eldridge.
Eldridge. Yeah, Stacy Eldridge and her husband John. Is it
Yes.
John Eldridge? Yeah, they're a Christian married couple, and the wife wrote Captivating to women, and the husband wrote a book called Wild at Heart to men. And Nathan and I read both of those books after we took the marriage class, and Captivating really emphasized what women were made for, emphasized that my husband, that no one will ever fully fulfill me, and that I can't look to him for that fulfillment or for that joy even in marriage, because he's human and he will fail over and over again, and so will I as a wife. Like, I will let him down, and I won't always, I can't be that for him. That's a huge calling, and, yes, we are called to look more like Christ, and we can be like him, but we're not God, we're not perfect, we're human, we're sinners, and we always will be. And so that book took a lot of tension off of my shoulders and just relief in the freedom that I have in Christ, and, just made me love him more. And I'm just so thankful that I know him, and he revealed himself to me when he did, and I don't need to run to Nathan for every single need that I need, that needs to be filled. I can run to God because he's more than enough. He'll always be there, and he's the only one that can do it. And so I'm just glad that there's someone, and that it's the God of the universe, and that he's perfect, and he knows exactly what I need, and he'll never leave me, and he's always just, like, waiting with open arms for me to come to him. So Nathan's amazing. I love him so much. He's my husband, he's my best friend, and I know that God gave him to me to go through this life and to have kids and a family, and to, I think that I know that a huge part of marriage is for Nathan and I to spread God's love to other people, to have kids, to show our friends what a godly marriage is like, to show our family what a healthy marriage is like. And so I just feel really honored that God chose us and that he gifted us with marriage and each other. And yeah, I kind of got lost. I forgot what I was saying.
Yeah, I feel like you were just saying that there's so many amazing things from your marriage and blessings, and it's not just like, oh, marriage is this duty that you're called to do that brings no fulfillment to yourself and you're going to be miserable just giving into the needs of other people and you just lose yourself. No, it's a gift
Yeah.
and it has a purpose in it, but at the same time, you can't look to it as your end all be all.
Yeah.
And that's something, I'm having to learn even in dating too.
Mhm.
It's going from being single for so long. I mean, I'm 25 and
Mhm.
I always wanted to get married at like 22 growing up because that was when my mom got married.
Yeah.
But I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful that it didn't happen that way because the Lord was able to tear down that idol of marriage in my life and show me,
Mm.
yes, it's good you have this desire. Don't feel ashamed for this desire for marriage because it's a good thing. But also, I'm all that you need. And I'm the only thing that's ever going to fulfill you.
Mhm.
And when I'm tempted to want to be like, oh, I have a boyfriend now, like, you know, I love being with him and he just enhances my life. Like, I'm good now. I don't need God. Oh my goodness. That reality comes crashing down so fast
Mhm.
to know that absolutely not. That's not his responsibility.
Yeah.
And he's not going to be able to give me all the satisfaction and fulfillment that I'm craving, like emotionally and spiritually, because that's God's job.
Mhm. Yeah, God's design for marriage is so beautiful. Like if you are surrendering your life, your plan for your life, everything to God, and you are following him and you're being obedient to the boyfriend is doing the exact same thing, and you guys are walking in line with God's design for dating and marriage, which that's a whole other topic that it's difficult. It's not easy to do exactly. It's not easy to follow God's will and design for marriage and for our lives. It's very difficult. But yeah, if you're filled up and obedient and you're fully focused on your relationship with God, you know that no one else can fulfill you the way that he does, and your boyfriend is doing the exact same thing, and you both understand the meaning of marriage, and you're both filled with life and joy and the fruits of the Spirit, the things that God promises to you if you follow him. Then you come together in marriage and even imagine why divorce would happen or hard things will happen. Yes, life is filled with suffering and we live in a broken world, but you will both just sacrifice for each other because you understand the sacrifice that Jesus did for all of us. You understand the severity of the cross. And so you're both just laying your lives down for each other. And that just, to me, sounds like the most wonderful thing ever. Like you have a person that loves you as much as the God of the universe loves you and treats you that way. And you're doing the same for them. And you're both just filled up by God's love and therefore can love each other properly. And if every marriage was like that, which at some point in time, that must have been the majority, divorce rates weren't what they are today. Like, I really believe that the reason that we are where we are today with so much brokenness and broken families and divorce and sad, terrible things is because I think people have fallen away from God. And
Mhm.
yeah, I kind of want to go back to the beginning when we were talking about your career and you talked about what it is that you do, but yeah, maybe we should go into how that's related to this.
Yeah, absolutely. I am seeing the effects of not sometimes broken marriages, but like what you were saying, people not really holding God's view for marriage and sex in the way that it should be, or maybe that culture once did. Um, and yeah, it's so hard. I mean, I know the truth myself and I work in this field and I even struggle to follow God's guidelines for this. I am human and I fail as well and just like everybody else, but I do come face to face with the reality of the sadness and the brokenness that it does bring to do things your own way and to do things culture's way. Um, I see a lot of unplanned pregnancies, like I was saying, and unplanned pregnancies can't even happen in a marriage situation, but more often than not, we're seeing single women come in who didn't plan to be pregnant, and it's wrecked their lives, and maybe they're even pregnant by a man that hurts them, or who just he's not committed to her, he's not married to her, and so then he thinks that this baby isn't his problem either. And by no means am I blaming these things on these women, not at all. That's not what I'm trying to say, but it is outside of God's design, and sometimes this is what happens, unfortunately. And if you could see the pain and just the feelings of despair that you can see in the eyes of these women when they come into our clinic and just find out they're pregnant and don't know what to do.
Are all of them believers?
Oh no, the
Okay.
people who come to us, no, they come to us for pregnancy test and an ultrasound,
Mm.
and a lot of them are considering abortion.
Mm.
And a
Wow.
lot of believers do come and are in that same situation,
Yeah.
but more often than not, they don't know Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's very sad to see. And at the same time, I've seen the Lord redeem those situations so beautifully. Sometimes these women come in so scared that they say, you know what, I didn't even believe in abortion before, but I don't know what else to do. So I'm going to make this choice. And we're able to walk alongside them and say, hey, is this really what you want to do? We're not here to make your decision for you or to judge you either way at all. It's completely your choice. But do you know God? Do you know that He has a plan for you? Do you know that He's in control even of your mistakes? And do you see, we give them an ultrasound and they see their baby and they say, you know what, maybe I can do this, not on my own, but with the help of someone who's bigger than me and who loves me and my baby more than I could ever imagine. So God is He has so much grace in every failure of ours. And even if we don't do things the way that He intended, which do any of us really, He's sovereign and in control of that, and He can change your direction in an instant. So that's really cool to see. But yeah, you could save probably a lot of hurt
Yeah.
and a lot of distress if we all just followed God's way from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Which we
and even
won't.
women who do choose to go through with that abortion too, I've seen the same thing. There's no point where you're too lost for God to come in and heal you.
Yeah.
So I've just seen some incredible things. I feel really honored to be able to witness like the miracles that He works in people's lives every day
Yeah.
and comes and meets them where they're at. Um,
I'm so glad that you mentioned that even when women have gone through with abortions, that you've still seen God redeem their stories and their lives. And yeah, God, that's what He does. He takes dark, scary things and pain and suffering and turns it into something beautiful.
yeah,
He makes things new all the time.
yeah,
And I can't imagine what it feels like to see that in your job. Like, I bet it's heartbreaking, but also really beautiful to see how God's moving in the lives of
absolutely.
others that don't know Him, but clearly He knows them and has a beautiful plan for them. And wow, yeah, that's amazing. What a
Yeah,
gift. Yeah.
yeah. But it really, I feel so blessed to that the Lord just told me, this is what you're going to do. I don't feel equipped. I don't feel
Mm.
equipped at all, but He told me that this is where I'm going to be. And it
Mm.
brings a lot of joy and just being able to see His grace
Yeah.
up close and
Mm-hmm.
how He works miracles.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, it does. Just relating back to our topic, it really goes to show how when we step outside of God's plan for our lives, things just get out of control. We go to places that we never expected to go and we stay there longer than we want to be. And it's just a reminder that when we're fighting against God's will for our lives, He's doing it out of love for us. He wants to protect us. He wants the best for us. And it's easy to say that and hear that and just be like, yeah, just like, oh yeah, I knew when I was in high school too that when my parents told me I couldn't go to that party, that they just wanted to protect me, but it didn't feel very good. But look at what he saved you from. Look at what they saved you from. Maybe the cops came that night or whatever. This analogy could go super far, but you understand that the Lord just has our best interests in mind, and He wants the most freedom for us. And His plan for marriage between one man and one woman and intimacy within that context is actually not limiting. It's the most beautiful and joyful way that we could experience earthly love.
I just want to say that when you were mentioning that you don't feel equipped for your job at all, but that's what He's calling you to, is exactly how I feel about this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I think I say it in almost every episode, but I'm going to say it again because every time I record, I feel so not equipped. And as I'm hearing you speak so beautiful. Like I know that the Holy Spirit is speaking through you, and I know that you have God's word written on your heart by the way that it's coming out of your mouth. And it's just so beautiful. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Cameron should run this podcast. Like, I feel very unequipped to do this. My mind is all over the place. I get nervous. I don't know what I'm doing, but I do think that God is calling me to do this. And it's not easy. It's really, really hard.
Yeah.
Especially when I invite, and I'm so thankful that you're here, but when I invite friends to come on and they're speaking more clear and eloquently than I ever could, and they have more knowledge of the gospel than I have. I'm like, why am I the one hosting this podcast? It shouldn't be me. And I feel that every single time I do it. But then I go to God's word and He reassures me that this is what He wants me to do. And so I really don't get it, and just have to trust Him and do what He says, because He knows better than I do, and who knows what will come of it in the future. But maybe He's calling me to do this so that I can give others the space to speak here and inspire other people. And I just want to share the gospel and glorify Him. And yeah, I'm just thankful that He's alive and active, and that we have the gift of His word. So
yeah. And He does that through us even when we don't think, I don't think you give, your feelings are so valid, but I don't think that you give yourself enough credit either, because I've heard you say, and I hear you say things that just also are saturated with God's love in every word that you say. And so sometimes we're not able to see the gifts that He's given us in ourselves, but He knows. Thank goodness that He knows, and that He's bigger than our feelings.
that's so kind.
Just another example.
Yeah, thank you.
I think, as far as divorce goes, I think that just goes back to, when your feelings can't sustain you in a relationship for a few months, at least in my case, let alone your whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you don't have something, especially speaking to people who aren't necessarily believers, if you don't have something outside of yourself and outside of the relationship that you're gaining strength and love from, and I believe that the only true source of that is God, but if you don't have that, then your relationship will crumble. And even if you stay together, even if you stay married, what type of marriage do you have? Is it intimate? Is it joyful? Or are you just living as roommates? And everyone has those seasons. That's nothing to be ashamed of, but God just wants so much more for you. And you're not going to find that fulfillment from divorcing and going and trying to find the next better thing. I think that our culture shift in how we view marriage as to fill ourselves instead of for mutual fulfillment and self-sacrifice there is a stat. I think it said that the divorce rate, I was reading this morning, the divorce rate is nearly twice what it was in 1960. And so I think that that's just directly related to everything we've been talking about.
Yeah. Do you know people that are married and aren't following God's design for marriage, or maybe they don't understand the meaning of marriage, they don't know God? Like, how do you, I guess we've already talked about this, but what's the difference? Like, what do you see and what do you hope for everyone that's married or is dating? Like, what do you hope for people your age or teenagers, young girls to know about. I guess dating is a whole other conversation, what happens before you get married, but um, we should date very intentionally,
Mhm.
and I don't think that everyone does. I don't think Nathan
Yeah.
and I dated that way because we didn't know Christ yet, and
Right.
so our relationship was a mess. And I can talk about that briefly so that other people know what happened leading up to our marriage. Like, this marriage that Cameron and I are talking about is not what Nathan and I model now, but we did not date intentionally to marry like this. Weren't obeying God. We didn't know him. We were very selfish before then. And when we were living for ourselves individually and when we were dating, like most people sadly date today, there was so much heartbreak for many reasons. I think the heartbreak, and you can speak on this as well because you might have, like, seeing it from your perspective as someone that's always known the true meaning of marriage. I think there was so much heartbreak in our relationship before we got married because we were dating as if we were already married. We were having sex, we were living together. There was commitment, but not as serious as marriage. And so when things would happen, when Nathan would treat me poorly or when I would treat him poorly or when I found out about cheating or when I was emotionally cheating, like, it hurt so much more because it felt like I was already tied to him. Like, our souls were tied from having sex and from treating our relationship as a marriage. And there was so much heartbreak that God has redeemed through our marriage and through our salvation. That it was years, 6 years of heartbreak that I know, maybe not, maybe it was God's plan, but I think we would have completely avoided if we had dated with intention to marry and followed God's guidelines for marriage and his design. And so I just want everyone listening to know that Nathan and I did not do things the way that God intended, and there's no shame around that. We've been set free from that, and God has redeemed our relationship into a beautiful marriage. But I wish that we had dated. I wish that when I was 25, like you, Cameron, that I had the knowledge and the wisdom that God has given you, because it would have saved me from, I mean, so much heartbreak. Like, the worst that Nathan and I have ever felt is when we're fighting, when our hearts are broken. It's awful. Like, you want to live, you have no joy. It's awful when you're dating and someone cheats, or like, those things are just, they're heartbreaking. And that's why God says these guidelines. It's because it's for our protection, it's for our own good. And so
Right.
I just want people listening to know that, like, maybe God, I think all of that happened so that I would have a heart for this, and so that I could tell my
Mhm.
friends and my family that aren't married yet and that are dating to do what I didn't do, because I regret it and I wish I could have followed those steps. Um, Again, I'm so thankful for where we are now, and God has redeemed all of it, but there was just so much hurt, so
Yeah.
much hurt. I can't emphasize how awful it was. And God got us through it, and now we know him and we love him. And looking back, I can see how his hand was in all of it and how he carried us through it. But it was so hard, and it was all my doing and Nathan's doing, because we were being selfish and just doing whatever our flesh told us to do. So yeah, it's really hard.
I am thankful that I've known the Lord my whole life and that He's spoken wisdom into me from His Word and the church and other followers of Him, to how marriage was created to be. But just because I have the knowledge doesn't mean that I've done it perfectly by any means either. In Romans 7, it talks about, this is paraphrasing, but that while we're on this earth, there's the battle between the flesh and the spirit. And I still do but I don't want to do. I still do the sin that I know I shouldn't do, that I don't want to do, but that I still do anyway. And it ends, chapter 7 ends with a verse that says, I have it right here. It says, this is 7, verse 25. Thanks be to God through Jesus Christ our Lord. So then I myself serve the law of God with my mind, but with my flesh I serve the law of sin. But emphasis on thanks be to God through Jesus Christ our Lord in the midst of that struggle, because Jesus came and lived the perfect life that I could never live. And he died the death that I deserved to die. And he rose again from the grave and he defeated sin and death. So, in my faith, in my union with Christ, he's already done what I could never do on my own. And even though I continuously fail, even when I have this truth and this knowledge, I fail in purity. I fail in being selfless. I fail in, looking to other things other than God to fulfill me. And even in those instances, Jesus says, it's okay. I've already won the battle for you. I've already paid the price for your sin. And here's my grace. Here's my grace so that you can get up and try again and know that you're not condemned, but that I am with you and I'm fighting this battle with you and that I want more for you. And I think for so long, just for anyone who is listening out there who's more on my end, where I did grow up a believer and I still, part of my testimony is just struggling with sin, specifically sexual sin, for many years. And I just felt so much shame over it. I just have felt like, well, I know better. So why am I still struggling with this? And God has just said, I don't want you to feel shame. I want you to know that you are still my daughter. You're still loved no matter what you've done, what you will do, or what you're doing right now. But that my grace is enough. And in my grace, I want you to believe how much I love you and that my way is better. And the more and more that I run to him with my sin and accept his righteousness, the more I believe him and the more I want to live a life that is running after what he wants, because I know the pain that's caused when I follow my own sin and desires. And so, yeah, I think it's just kind of a similar but different story to yours. You had all this pain and suffering in the past, and then God worked his redemption and y'all have grown toward a beautiful marriage. And I have all of that too, less in one point, but in many, many points throughout my life. That process of repenting, running back to him, falling, repenting, running back to him. And I'm just so thankful that he's always there, that he's gonna redeem the situation, because that's who he is and that's who he's promised to be, and it doesn't rest on me. So I just say that to encourage people who are like, okay, this all sounds great, this view of marriage, yes, it's encouraging, but it's so hard, and you're not alone in it. You're not expected to do this alone, and you're not expected to be perfect.
Yeah, as someone that is in a marriage, it is very hard, and Nathan and I fail at it all the time. And we have to run to God, like you said, again and again. And I'm just thankful that God knows that we're going to mess up and that he's still there for us, exactly like you just said. So it is hard to follow, but path is narrow, right? Like it is, God does not promise that it's going to be easy, and that there's not going to be any pain or suffering. In fact, he says the opposite. It's a narrow road, but it's the right one. It's the one that he calls us to, and it's the one that leads to life. And so, yeah, Nathan and I have to get out of our comfort zones and pick up our cross daily, which Lou and I talked about in the last podcast. And yeah, it's not easy, but that's where joy in life are found, and it's worth it. And so this is really encouraging for me to continue to read the scriptures over and over again and follow God's design for me as a wife, and to be thankful for the gift of marriage. Yeah, thing that came up while you were talking, you were saying there's no shame in how often you fail. So glad that you said that. One thing that came up that I hear is an argument outside of the church a lot is like, well, if Christians fail over and over again, but they know what's right, like, isn't that a little hypocritical? I think that's why sometimes people outside of the church look at the church as hypocrites. I hope that in when people hear you speak as you what you just said now, they'll realize that you're just human. Like, you're not being a hypocrite by having this knowledge and not following it. You want to, as you just said, that's your desire. That's my desire, is to do what God wants me to do, but I fail every day. And the reality is that we're humans and God knows that. And I'm just glad that we have a good God that doesn't punish us and doesn't want us to feel shame, doesn't want to condemn us for those things. He
Yeah.
just sees us as his children, right? It's kind of like, this is used a lot, but I mean, God is our father. It's like a dad and a child. Like, you see that they're gonna mess up, right? You're like, don't do that, and they do the thing. They know
Yeah.
not to
Yeah.
do it, but they're gonna do it, and you have to forgive them and love them, and you put those guidelines and those restrictions on them for out of love. It's not control. It's because you love them and you want what's best for them. You don't want them to burn their finger, and so you tell them not to touch the stove, and then they do
Right.
it anyway. And I guess that we just have to learn the hard way, unfortunately. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
For sure. We are human and but that's why, none of us are going to be perfect, and the more I try to fix my behavior on my own, the less I'm able to do it.
Mhm.
And I think that goes a lot back to what we were talking to about how being filled by the love of God is the only thing that's going to propel you toward having a good marriage or changing your behavior. God's not after our outward actions, He's after our hearts. And so the more time I spend with him and knowing his character and his heart and his plan for me, the more I want to obey him. And so that's a big thing that I've learned too, is that yes, behavior is important. No, I'm never saying that we should just do whatever we want because God only cares about our heart, and our actions don't matter. That's not what I'm saying. But when we're focusing on our behavior more than we're focusing on our relationship with him, nothing's going to change. And the more that you press into him and get to know him and just be honest with him, he promises to transform and renew your heart and mind. And that's where true sanctification comes from, is from knowing him.
Thank you, Cameron. You've said so much. Everything you've said is true and just so beautifully spoken. And I'm so thankful for this
Me
conversation.
too. It was so fun.
Is there anything else you wrote down or like want to quickly chat about? I do want to share while you're looking how Cameron and I know each other, because it is a testimony of God's faithfulness and goodness, not only to me, but to our friend Zoe that we have in common. So Nathan and I were at Whole Foods grocery shopping, and I kept seeing this girl over and over again, and we ran into each other on the like granola bar, protein bar aisle, because Whole Foods has a whole aisle just for that. And I was standing there, and Zoe, our friend that we have in common, was right next to me, and she was like, "Hey, do you see these bars? I don't remember. I think they're called Viva bars or something." And there's a lot of bars on the wall, so she was trying to find them, and I looked, and I was like, "No, I don't think they sell those here. I think it's only online." And she was just so kind. So, so kind. And she was like, "What's your name?" And I introduced myself, and she complimented my tattoo. Like, she was just so full of life and so sweet. And I've never had an interaction like that with anyone in public, much less at the grocery store. She just seemed like she wanted to get to know me, even though
Yeah.
she was just asking me to help her find a granola bar on this aisle. And that was it. She was like, "Okay, well, have a nice day, bye." And we kept running into each other after that. on the same aisle, and I was like, "Okay, if I see this girl one more time, I have to say something." Like, I felt nudged by the Holy Spirit to say something, and that was probably the first time that I felt God push me to do something.
Mm.
You just know when it's not you, and we ended up at the same checkout, and, I told Nathan, I was like, "Wait here, I'm gonna go talk to her." She was in front of us checking out, and I go up to her. I know nothing about her, just that she was filled with God's light, and I could feel Jesus' love radiating through her. Looking back now, I realized that at the time I was just like, "This is unique. I need to say something." And I was like, "Hey, I know this is weird, but I feel called to give you my number. Is that okay?" And she was like, "Of course." She gave me her phone number. And I noticed, this is funny, Zoe, if you're listening, but noticed that she had like 75 or some like crazy amount of unread messages. And I was like, oh my gosh, this girl's really popular. She's probably not going to text me. Like, I thought that was the end of it. And it wasn't. I think she ended up texting me the next day or maybe the next week, but shortly after. And she was like, hey, are you a Christian? Because usually people outside of the church don't say they feel called.
Mm.
And I was like, yeah, I am. I go to the Austin Stone. And she had just moved here from Michigan. And she was like, I actually was just praying the other day and asking God to send me friends in Austin. She moved here without knowing anyone.
Mhm.
And she moved here to be a teacher. No coincidence that she's a teacher in Dripping Springs, where Nathan and I live. We live just on the outskirts of Austin, and she happened to get a job in Dripping Springs. And there was just so much synchronicity, and just knew, okay, God answered her prayers, but also answered my prayers because I had been praying for Christian community specifically. And so everything about it was just mind blowing. I was like, oh my gosh, God is so good. He put us together.
Yeah.
Like, he kept bumping us into each other at the grocery store over and over again so that we would know each other. And so Zoe and I started a beautiful friendship, and she's been pivotal in my sanctification journey. And she actually baptized me this last March, which was really beautiful.
So
And
sweet.
Zoe's roommates with Cameron up until a couple of weeks ago. She actually moved back home. God was calling her back home to Michigan. And so that's how I know Cameron. But it's a crazy story. I've never met someone like that in public. And I'm just so thankful that God put us together at that exact moment. It was not a coincidence to bump into her. So
Yeah, absolutely not. And I remember her telling me that story too and talking about it. And it's just so cool because it is another testament of how the Lord just provides everything that we need, and how we were saying we don't feel equipped to the things He calls us to. Well, I don't want to speak for Zoe or share her story, but she wouldn't mind me saying that she felt the Lord call her to Texas and didn't really know why, where she was from Michigan. She had no roots in Austin, but He led her there and He provided every step of the way for her. And which, another story, but very similar to how I got here too. And in our jobs and in this podcast and in our walk, in our marriages, or in purity, or in dating, or any of these things that we've talked about today, that the Lord doesn't leave you alone, and He leads you step by step, and He's always with you. And so, I don't know, I just find that really encouraging. I'm glad you shared that story. I love that story. I think that's about everything.
okay, thank you so much, Cameron.
Yeah, thanks
You're
for
beautiful.
having me.
It's an honor to know you, and I'm so thankful to be your sister in Christ, and for all that God's doing in you.
Yeah,
And
you too, friend.
yeah, thank you for being here. Okay, bye,
Bye.
guys.